reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, answers by citing the Lord's version, text number 40. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Prajapati Dharmapati.
Prajapati Dharmapati.
Ekadha Niyamanyamam.
Ekadha Niyamanyamam.
Bhadram Prajnam Anvicham.
Bhadram Prajnam Anvicham.
Atistat Sratakamyaya.
Atistat Sratakamyaya.
Prajapati Dharmapati.
Prajapati Dharmapati.
Ekadha Niyamanyamam.
Ekadha Niyamanyamam.
Bhadram Prajnam Anvicham.
Bhadram Prajnam Anvicham.
Atistat Sratakamyaya.
Atistat Sratakamyaya.
Prajapati Dharmapati.
Prajapati Dharmapati.
Ekadha Niyamanyamam.
Ekadha Niyamanyamam.
Bhadram Prajnam Anvicham.
Bhadram Prajnam Anvicham.
Atistat Sratakamyaya.
Atistat Sratakamyaya.
Prajapati,
Prajapati.
the forefather of all living entities. Dharmapati, the father of religious life. Ekada, once upon a time. Niyaman, rules and regulations. Yaman, principles of control. Bhadram, welfare. Prajanam, of the living beings. Anvicham, desiring. Atistad, situated. Srata, own interest. Kamyaya, so desiring. Translation to the language, C.C. Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila. Thus, once upon a time, the forefather of living entities and the father of religiousness, Lord Brahma, situated himself in acts of regulative principles, desiring self-interest for the welfare of all living entities. Translation, please repeat. Thus, once upon a time, the forefather of living entities and the father of religiousness, Lord Brahma, situated himself in acts of regulative principles, desiring self-interest for the welfare of all living entities. One cannot be situated in an exalted position without having undertaken a regulative life of rules and regulations. An unrestricted life of sense gratification is animal life, and Lord Brahma, in order to teach all concerned within the jurisdiction of his generations, taught the same principles of sense control for executing higher duties. He desired the welfare of all as servants of God, and anyone desiring the welfare of the members of his family and generations must conduct a moral religious life. The highest life of moral principles is to become a devotee of the Lord, because a pure devotee of the Lord has all the good qualities of the Lord. On the other hand, one who is not a devotee of the Lord, however qualified he may be, in the mundane sense of the term, cannot be qualified with any good quality worthy of the name. The pure devotees of the Lord, like Brahma and persons in the chain of disciplic succession, do not do anything to instruct their subordinates without acting accordingly themselves. So previous verse we heard that Lord Brahma, after finishing his tapasya and being blessed by the Lord, went ahead with his service of recreating the universe full of living entities. So of course this process is ongoing. And we're here hearing today that, in one sense, given the qualification of a person in such a highly qualified position, Lord Brahma being the first living entity of the universe, is also, in that sense, the most qualified to perform this service. We hear that someone who takes the post of Brahma needs to be acting as a perfect Brahmana for, is it 100 lifetimes? So, this is a highly qualified position. And one needs to set an ideal example for that. Prabhupada, he always gives that example that if the teacher is telling the students not to smoke cigarettes, but then later the students see that same teacher smoking cigarettes, what does that mean about the teacher? It's a bit of hypocrisy. That example is better than precept. That it's not do as I do, do as I say, it should be do as I do. If you're saying one thing but your own example is completely opposite of what you're saying, you're going to lose respect for your dependents or students, followers. So therefore, on every level, we should be striving to set an ideal example. The spiritual master has to set an ideal example for his disciples, and also members of the institution should be setting a good example for the rest of the general public. Otherwise, they will just there won't be any respect, or they'll just say, well, you're saying one thing, but you're doing the opposite, so that's simply hypocrisy. Why should we be speaking to? So it's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita that some people, they speak very nicely, but they don't act very nicely. And other people act nicely, but don't speak. But the ideal person is one who speaks and also acts very nicely, giving an ideal example for others. So there's one story that comes to mind from the Ramayana that the battle of Lanka is finished and Ravan has been killed, and then Hanuman, he comes to find Sita at the Ashok Grove, and in preparation to receive Lord Ram to rescue his beloved Sita. And he notices that the Rakshasis, the she-Rakshasas, they've been harassing Sita for almost a year at that time that Sita was captured. And so Hanuman's looking around in great contempt, and so Mother Sita, I should kill all these people, all these women. They've been harassing you and keeping you in a situation of terror, and threatening you and not feeding you, not looking after you in any way. And he was just very angry. He was just ready to kill everybody. And but Mother Sita, being very soft-hearted, said, no, you shouldn't kill them. And she tells a story that there was a hunter who was being chased in the forest by a tiger. And the hunter sees this tree, and he very quickly runs up, climbs up the tree. And but he doesn't realise at the top of the tree there's a bear. And so the tiger stops looking up, and the tiger calls out to the bear, this hunter is a common enemy. You should throw him down, I'll eat him, and we'll both be safe from the danger of this hunter. And the bear calls down and says, no, this tree is my home, he's taking share of my home, he's my guest. And so the tiger thinks for a moment, and he changes his tack and he calls out to the hunter. See that bear, at a moment's notice, he's going to kill you. You should knock him down, and I will eat the bear, and then I'll be satisfied, and then we can both go on our way. Like that. So the hunter, thinking that's a good idea, he starts shaking the branch the bear is on, and the bear falls out, but he manages to grab onto a lower branch and climb back up again. And the tiger said to the bear, said, "Just see, that hunter is the enemy of both of us. You know, he doesn't care about you." And the bear replies, "No, he didn't act properly. That doesn't mean I don't have to act properly. He's my guest, he's taking share of my home, and he's under my protection." Like that. So that's the story that Sita gives Hanuman. But just because others are not acting properly, that doesn't mean that everybody should follow that example. So, so that's the lesson, or the point that we're hearing from here, that a person of responsibility should be acting in the highest position of behaviour, so setting an ideal example for others. So we have, as mentioned in the word for word, that this Niyaman and Yaman. So in the Stanga Yoga, Yama and Niyama, that we're hearing that the rules and regulations in general, and also principles of self-control as well. So this is the very beginning of yoga. Unless you're setting a very good foundation of your spiritual practice in regards to ideal sort of platform of human behaviour, you're not having a solid platform for continuing with your spiritual life. So it doesn't matter how elevated you think you are, if you don't have the basics of civilized human behaviour, it's just going to be hypocritical. And so Lord Brahma, he's the founder of our discipline session, Brahman Mata Gaudiya Sampradaya. So his example that he's giving us here is ideal as the founding spiritual master. So Prabhupada told us that everybody should become guru. But so what does that mean? That everybody should be sitting on the asana and accepting disciples? Not necessarily, but everybody in their own way, if they're acting ideally, in an ideal way, proper behaviour, in a sense they're guru and that they're teaching others how to behave. Of course, there's not just Diksha Guru, there's also Shiksha Guru, one who is instructive and instructing to others. Bhatnapadashana Guru, one who partly realises, like introduces one to Krishna. And even that person isn't necessarily a devotee themselves. We have the story of Bilvamangal Thakur, and he had his lady friend, the prostitute Chintamani, who he would regularly visit, because he wasn't, his devotion hadn't actually manifested at that point. But there was a raging storm, and he developed this desire. He wanted to go and see Chintamani. So, despite the raging storm and the flood, he was trying to cross raging river, and he held onto a log. And after a while, he realised it wasn't a log; it was a dead body floating. And anyway, he managed to get the other side, and he pulled himself up. He thought it was the root of a tree, but it ended up being a snake. And anyway, in so many ways, and eventually he got to Chintamani's place, and Chintamani was just shocked that, such tribulations he went to see her. And she said that if you had this determination to develop love for Krishna, you'd be a pure devotee by now, more or less. That was the message, and that really struck home. And so he considered, even though she was a prostitute, he considered her his, like Shiksha Bhatnapadashana Guru, that she was the one who set him on the path towards Krishna. So, I mentioned it was some time ago, but it was a story that gives some instruction about how or whether one should accept the post of being a guru, a spiritual master. There was one Brahmana who was living in a cottage by the Ganga, and one full night he was very restless, he couldn't sleep. So he went for a walk along the bank of the Ganga, and after some time he saw this very young, beautiful, effulgent man. He was taking a bath in the river, and his cloth was effulgent, the garland and the turban, everything was effulgent. And he said, "Hey, you must be demigod. I've never seen a person like you." And the beautiful young man said, "Yeah, I'm from Swagaloka. How is it you can see me? You shouldn't be able to see me." Anyway, they were surprised, but they started talking, become friends. And so the Brahmana was asking all sorts of questions, and he said, "So you don't come to the planet Earth very often?" No, it's a Kali Yuga. It's not a very nice place, but I just come to take a bath in the Ganga and then I go back. And so the Brahmana was thinking in his head, Swagaloka, heavenly planets, it must be so nice. And he said, "So do you think maybe you can take me to the heavenly planets?" And the demigod was saying, "Well, normally it's not the done thing like that, but somehow or other you can see me and we've met and must be some special arrangement. So anyway, next full moon, every full moon I come to take bath. Next full moon you come here and we can try to make some sort of arrangement. We can take you to the heavenly planets." So the Brahmana, he went back home, and of course for the rest of the night he couldn't sleep. He was so restless and excited about it. And the next morning, big smile on his face, and he was doing his puja, and his wife was looking at him. Everything he was doing, he was smiling. And his wife commented, "So what happened? You're always smiling." And so the Brahmana says, "Well, I have to smile sometimes, And he said, no, it's something happened, you have to tell me." And the Brahmana said, "No, never mind, it's a heavenly business." And the wife said, "Something happened, you never say heavenly. I'm your wife, you have to tell me." So like that. So eventually he relented and said, "Well, last night I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk along the bank of the Ganga, and I met a demigod. He'd come down from the heavenly planets, and he said, next full moon he's going to take me back to the heavenly planets." And so his wife said, "Well, what about me?" And the Brahmana said, "Well, he didn't mention you." "Well, why didn't you mention me? I'm your wife, why didn't you mention me?" And then, she became angry and crying and said, "You promised when you got married you'd look after me. If you go to heavenly planets, be like a widow. What's to become of me? If you don't take me to the heavenly planets, I'm going to jump in the Ganga and drown myself." So the Brahmana said, "Oh, okay. I don't know how he's going to take me to the heavenly planets, but you come with me next full moon and somehow or other, we'll make some arrangement we can make." So anyway, the wife was somewhat pacified. But the Brahmana said, "Whatever you do, don't tell anybody." So then he went off to the local temple and was doing some seva. And the wife, she was finishing off the housework, but she was thinking, she's got this secret in her heart, and what do you do? It's burning. What do you do when you've got such a secret like that? There's been some studies whether men or women are better at keeping secrets. Sometimes they say men can keep secrets better, sometimes they say women can. And of course we've got the Raj Yudhisthira, he cursed his mother Kunti that when he found out that Karna was actually the oldest brother, and he didn't realise that. Being very humble, Yudhisthira would have been happy to allow Karna to take the post, as emperorship, and he would just humbly serve him. But because Kunti kept that secret, the whole battle took place, and so he cursed all women that never be able to keep secrets. Anyway, that's the situation. But anyway, so this wife, she just, I've got this secret, and what do I do? So eventually she just couldn't help herself. She went to the next door neighbour, knocked on the door, and actually I remember years ago, one temple I was at, this Grihastha couple who were living next door to us, somehow or other, they had decided to go to another temple, but they didn't want the temple president to know that they were leaving. I don't know, it was a whole arrangement situation there. Anyway, one day they come over and said, shh, don't tell anybody, but actually we're going to this other temple. And of course we didn't have to tell anybody, because they went around to all the other families and said, just don't tell anybody, but we're going to this other place. And so it's like, what was that saying? That a rumour in the palace is an announcement in the marketplace. So, you know, one or two people, they think they've got this great secret, but actually everybody knows, like that. So this Brahmana's wife, she went to the next door neighbour and knocked on the door and said, shh, don't tell anybody, but guess where we're going next full moon? Like that. So anyway, the next full moon, the Brahman and his wife, they're walking along the bank of the Ganga looking for that demigod. And eventually they saw him in the same spot taking bath. And so they just, impatiently waiting for him to finish. But they didn't realise in the forest around them, the whole village was waiting there. You know, all thinking, today we're going to the heavenly planets. And, they're sort of looking at each other and whispering and making signs. And anyway, eventually the Brahmana comes out, the demigod comes out, says, okay, so we can be going now, but before we go, if there's any questions, you ask them now, because once we're up in the air, it's very dangerous. You cannot say anything, you cannot speak. Okay? And so the Brahmana had lots of different questions. What about this? What about that? Anyway, eventually he was satisfied. So the demigod said, okay, so I'm going to go up in the air and you grab hold of my feet. And in this way we're going to heavenly planets. But just reminding, once we're up in the air, you don't say a word. Okay, so that was agreed. So at that point the Brahmana gave a signal to his wife and looked at his feet, so she understood. And so the demigod is going up, he grabbed hold of his feet, and then the wife come out and grabbed hold of the Brahmana's feet. And as she was going up, the next villager grabbed hold of her feet, and in that way, a big, long chain of people, going up in the air, and the demigod's thinking, well, this Brahmana's very heavy, I wonder what's going on. And the Brahmana was looking down, he could barely see the end of the line. And he was thinking, he called out to the demigod, said, how big is the heavenly planets? And he was thinking that, is everyone going to fit? And the Brahmana, the demigod said, quiet, I told you not to say anything, but the Brahmana just couldn't help himself. He was holding onto the feet. Is the heavenly planets this big? And in this way, everybody fell down, and, in the river, some of the villagers drowned, others managed to straggle to the banks. And anyway, the whole idea of going to heavenly planets all fizzled all at once. So of course it's an allegorical story, but what we can hear from that, the lessons we can learn is that, the demigod insisted that the Brahmana not speak, but he failed to do that, so disobeying the orders of the spiritual master. It's also the demigod was, in a sense, irresponsible, that he's trying to, act as the guru, uplifting that Brahmana to the heavenly planets when he wasn't really qualified. So he was being a bit irresponsible. And also the Brahmana, inadvertently, he was trying to deliver the whole village to the heavenly planets. And so, so it was a big failure. So anyway, that's an illustrative story there that, one needs to be qualified. If one put themselves in a position of authority, really here, as Rishabh Dave said, one should never be a husband or a mother or a teacher, demigod, king, like that, unless they can deliver their dependence from the repeated cycle of birth and death. So it's an important lesson to learn that if we accept a post of responsibility, position means responsibility. You can't have the position without accepting the responsibility as well. So one needs to be on the highest level of moral principles, and especially in spiritual life, the highest level of spiritual practice. So you're setting an ideal example for others. So here it says, it may sound harsh, but Prabhupada says, on the other hand, one who is not a devotee of the Lord, however qualified he may be in the mundane sense of the term, cannot be qualified with any good qualities worthy of the name. So does that mean that anybody who's not a devotee has no good qualities? Well, of course there are some, but we're talking about spiritual and material. So even if one is on the top level of a mode of goodness, that they're not causing harm to anybody and they're living a very sattvic life, etc. Still, if their goal is not to come closer to Krishna, and their goal is not to end the cycle of birth and death, then ultimately all their material good qualities don't ultimately get them anywhere. In the end, it's just continuing their cycle of samsara, repeated birth, death, old age and disease. So in that sense, we can understand Prabhupada's message that one who is a devotee means that they're coming closer to Krishna. Krishna is recognising them, blessing them, and that their ultimate goal, whether it's in this life or a future life, they're ultimately destined to escape the cycle of birth and death and go back home to the spiritual world. So regardless, even if one is practicing some sort of spiritual life, but they're not actually developing love of God, they're not actually coming closer to Krishna in their relationship, there needs to be some sort of adjustment, because otherwise it simply becomes or if they're thinking they're practicing spiritual life, but it's a very speculative process, mixing all different things together. So Prabhupada says, kitcha religion, everything mixed together. Then ultimately, the Goswami says, it simply becomes a disturbance to society. So therefore, the rules and regulations are there to be followed by one who is interested in achieving self-realization, coming closer to Krishna. And we should avoid the idea of speculation, that pure devotional service is said to be devoid of the desire for fruitive activity and mental speculation, and that it should be favourably practiced. And if one, so that's Bhagavatam mentions, calls this Kaitavadharma, the cheating religion, or thinking you're practicing some religion, but if it's simply your desire is just to get ahead materially, then you're just simply cheating yourself. So I know Kavichandra Maharaj, who preaches in Africa a lot, and a lot of Christian groups are very influential in the sense that they, rather than just say, if you worship God, then your life will become better. Like they're just very blunt about it. So if you worship God, you become rich, and all your, basically that's the message. That's Kavichandra Maharaj. That money will pour out of heaven if you become a Christian like that. So this is what we call Kaitavadharma. That's not the goal of spiritual life. The goal of spiritual life is not to develop or try to achieve a material position. I mean, if that comes, it comes, but that's not the goal. The goal is to ultimately go back to our original home in the spiritual world. So if you follow the example of Lord Brahma, ideal example, he achieved the ultimate goal of pleasing Krishna with his tapasya, being blessed by him, and was able to engage in his service, repopulating the universe. And as the chapter goes on here, it goes on to how Narada Muni was also following his footsteps as the ideal son of Lord Brahma. Okay, we'll end there. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Might not need the mic, there's no questions.
I've got a question.
Okay.
Early on, you were speaking about the point purport about setting an example and doing as I do. Sometimes we hear do as I say and do as I do, or we don't imitate, we follow. So can you speak about the subtle differences between these points?
Yeah, well, Prabhupada would say that, we follow, but we don't imitate. In other words, we can follow the example, but we shouldn't think we're on the same level, like that. So it can be a fine line, but our process that Lord Chaitanya gave us, following in the footsteps of the gopis, the residents of Vrindavan, is the process that of achieving, Goloka Vrindavan. But we shouldn't think that we are also gopis ourselves or residents of Vrindavan. We're just following the example. And so I think it was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that Siddha Pranali, he condemned that process. Siddha Pranali means the so-called guru is revealing to you what your original position is in the spiritual world. And so some of the early devotees, they got caught up with some of the local Brajbasis. And so one devotee was apparently told that he was a peacock in Krishna Leela. So somebody saw him jumping off bed, flapping his wings, practicing like that. That's just imitating, So I remember one class here a couple of years ago, a devotee asked Mukunda Maharaj, said, so the service that we're doing now, is that indicative of what our position is in the spiritual world? And he says, no, it's very dangerous to think like that also. So we shouldn't be speculating that maybe on this, maybe on that. So that's like imitating in the sense that it's a cheap imitation, cheaply understanding, that I'm making great progress or that I'm on a higher level than I am. Following in the footsteps means humble servant of the servant, like that. So, because you could use the example of Daruka. Daruka was Krishna's charioteer. And so he could have got very puffed up in his position that, I'm the only one who's qualified to drive Krishna's chariots and nobody else can do it. He said he could have, but he was humbly doing that service, and Krishna was reciprocating that Daruka was feeling great ecstasy, but actually he prayed to Krishna that please take away this ecstasy because I can't do my service properly, like that. So that was the focus, just humbly serving Krishna rather than thinking that there's someone wonderful like that. I guess that's a few things that come to mind, but is there some other more specific points? Yeah.
Can you read, I think it was in the report, Prabhupada mentions that person that followed all the rules and regulations.
As the first sentence, one cannot be situated in an exalted position without having undertaken a regular life of rules and regulations. So that's when we get initiated, we're following the 4 rules and regulations. So that's is that called Bhakti Yoga? It's what's the word? Vaidhi Bhakti is rules and regulations, whereas once we gradually progress through that and come onto the spontaneous level, Raganuga Bhakti. So on this point of imitating and following one who artificially puts themselves on that platform of Raganuga Bhakti, it's like apparently spontaneous, that's also condemned. It's just very artificial. That we think that the residents of Vrindavan are at that level, therefore we can also. But we have to qualify ourselves first. Yes, Vaishnavi.
Thank you for the class. You mentioned about the devotee who is going around to all the householders and saying, don't tell anyone who's moving to another temple. So the Guhyam Prakriti, the Guhyam Prakriti, revealing one's mind and confidence, is that our tendency to try to find someone's opinions or suggestions to suit our own false ego? And is that why we have that tendency to go to different people? Because we need to also just find maybe 1 or 2 people to build our mind and confidence. So how do we choose who we go to and not also just tell everyone?
At least it's somebody that we have trust and faith in, and that they won't, spread the news around as well like that. It has to be some. So it has to go both ways. That mutual respect. That if you're going to reveal your mind in confidence to somebody else, that they're not going to be spreading it around, and vice versa like that. So it has to be mutual respect. But it comes in time. You develop that relationship. You don't go up to a stranger and reveal your mind to them. It has to be a relationship that's based on faith and respect, etc. On that example of the couple, they're no longer practicing devotees. It was a bit whimsical. The idea is that if you're going to do anything in spiritual life, you should get the blessings of the devotees, whereas they were trying to avoid that due to some sort of, ulterior motive or whatever. So it was just a little bit of a joke amongst the rest of the community that they were trying to do like that, but in the end it wasn't beneficial. The whole move wasn't beneficial for them anyway. So, but the main point is that there has to be mutual respect for the person revealing, your mind to. So, it's that what you've got to share is safe with them, like that. And it takes time to develop that. It might take years even to develop that. Okay, thank you very much.